This conference will now be recorded.
Alrighty, now that we've hit quorum, 3 of the 5 members assigned to this subgroup, I've went ahead and started the meeting recording. We are still waiting on Matt and Pike, but since we have hit the quorum, the group can decide to begin discussion or continue to wait for them.
Let's just get started. See how far we get. Conscious of everyone's time.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I mean,
He's on board.
Yeah, I'm on board.
Alrighty, well, 10:03 a.m. Eastern, the meeting has been called to order. We look forward to Matt and Pike joining us. The Zoom room will not work, so hopefully pretty soon they'll see that the links have been updated. The links were updated in accordance with open meeting law. They are corrected on the Outlook calendar for members, as well as all of our public-facing sites as well. We do have some members of the public. It looks like GMP, VGS, and more from the Public Service Department, as well as Tracy's on from the Commission. I just want to start off by saying welcome. You'll notice I am in fact not Ashira. She had a medical emergency over the weekend and will be out until further notice. So I will be facilitating both of the subgroup meetings that will be happening today, Monday, April 15th. And then I will be closely supporting Catherine Morris from CBI for tomorrow's full group meeting. I'll be performing the organizing tasks that Ashira has been as well until she's back. So Mia, you and I will be working closely together, and of course with Catherine as appropriate, to do things like compile the agenda, send out notices, and post the proper meeting materials. For this meeting, as well as the other subgroup meeting today, I will be here primarily as the facilitator. Of course, if there are questions on the PUC's perspective, I will do my best to answer them, but I just want to make clear that I'm here primarily as a facilitator, and will do my best to not interject in the conversation beyond that. I did just get an email from Pike about the meeting link, so I'm going to send him the updated link, add Matt to that email, and hopefully they'll be on momentarily. I don't even know Matt's email off the top of their head because it is not coming up for me.
I can find it. It's under I don't think his name's in his email. It's Matt.
It's Matt at meadowhillvt.com.
Thank you.
Matt.
Oh, here it is.
Oh, perfect.
That's not it. Alrighty, apologies for the delay. Hi, Matt. Alrighty. Alright, just send it over to Pike. Hopefully he'll be on in a minute. The last piece of a little intro I wanted to ask the group about was public input. Of course, per open meeting law, we do have public input scheduled for the last 10 minutes of this meeting. Given that this meeting is scheduled for an hour and a half with a theoretical 70-minute discussion time, I wanted to ask the question if the group wanted to open up this meeting for public comment sometime before the end of the meeting, possibly about a halfway point, thinking about 11 o'clock in the midst of the discussion. I see endorsement from Matt and Ben.
That'd be great.
Mia, all right. So I don't believe we'll need to take official motion on that, but about 11 o'clock, maybe 10:45, 11 o'clock, when the breaking conversation is useful for that, I will do an extra public comment section. So members of the public who are in attendance, Dylan, Chris, Julie, about between 10:45 and 11, we'll have a moment for public comment, and then another one at the end of the meeting. Alrighty, so let's get into it. Credit ownership and all of its implications. I will remind the group that the charge from the EAG full group is to discuss the implication of credit ownership frameworks. I assume starting with the staff proposal from the PUC, draft a memo to the PUC from the Equity Advisory Group on credit ownership issues, and recommend topics for further discussion to the full Equity Advisory Group. Also note that the PUC is interested in concerns related to the current proposal, as well as any definite policy suggestions that the group has for the Commission. So with that, I will open it up.
I'll just add, so we started this as a less formal subgroup, but kind of realized, I think that this was only going to progress if we could produce a work product that hopefully the group will be able to sign on, the full EAG that is, to create actionable advice for the PUC in the sort of short time frame we have. And I think that shouldn't be the sort of end point. Like these discussions are going to stretch through the life of our EAG group, because I think credit ownership is going to be so important to equity issues. But I think we should maybe have a goal for today of trying to come up with things that we believe will be as broadly acceptable as possible to the whole group, that we think we can build consensus off, so that we can get a formal response to the PUC in the short term, and then figure out what kind of issues we need to keep discussing in the long term over the next couple months, and in our final report. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
It does.
Okay. Yep. If I may, I have I read the 3-page document and I have some specific comments on the questions. But if I may, at a high level, I just wonder, when we are deliberating policy initiatives like this, I wonder whether we should take the time to bracket the problem that we are trying to solve. What I mean by that is, if you look at the total greenhouse gas emission related to the heating sector, the way the discussion has been, the proposal has been laid out here, there are 3 categories. The first category comes under installed measure. So the way I understand is, installed measure will be something like heat pump, either at a residence or an apartment complex or some other type of commercial location. So that's one category. The second category is a parcel of biofuel blend that has got the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that gets delivered to a specific point of use. So that's the second category. The third category, I understand, relates to utility companies such as natural gas provider, who mixes a biofuel blend in the network, and it gets delivered to whatever that network represents. All of Vermont, a subset of Vermont, however that piping network is set up, and people opt in or opt out for the service. Do we have a measure or articulation of how big the 3 problems are? Having done some work on the climate action plan, I think the first category is a fairly large category. I'm not sure how big the second category is. I could think that the third category is fairly big as well. So maybe, I guess my point is, instead of trying to solve everything, we should be focusing on delivering the problem that has got the biggest bang for the buck. So I don't know, I will stop there. That's just a high level comment and a perspective from my side.
So can I jump in here into the silence? So because I'm involved in this at the tag as well, and I know others are, obviously the DPS staff is, it's my concept, feel free to disagree, that where it comes to the EAG and our input, I think our focus should be on the equitable distribution of credits to make sure those in low and moderate income, LMI, have access to the services that reduce thermal emissions because that's the charge of the Act 18. And I think that's our charge as the equity advisory group to ensure that we're not just installing a bunch of heat pumps, weatherization, and renewable natural gas and modern wood stoves and biofuels in the homes of wealthy suburbanites, but we're actually making sure that those of low and moderate income Vermonters can get access to the same types of services that reduce their thermal energy burden. So with that, I think it's really important that we think about who owns the credits and how that transaction happens for someone in those income categories. And broadly speaking, the idea of credit ownership um, is who's the decision maker and who's making the capital investment. And there are lots of people and individuals and companies and organizations that will have a hand in it. But in order for someone of low and moderate income to receive value for doing what is an investment in their property, I think we're going to have to answer that question. I don't know what the answer is, but that's how I sort of frame it as we go into this process.
Yeah. So maybe my intent, Matt, there was, I see us trying to focus on the second and third category may not be a top priority for us from a equity consideration. I guess maybe that's how I'm trying to illustrate the point that we should be focusing on the end customer and how the heat credit belongs to the end customer, because I don't have a good way of measuring the impact of the other two categories. So I'm not even sure how much time we should be spending on the other two categories. That's my whole point.
Right. Okay.
When you say other two categories, you're talking about fuels, basically delivered fuels.
Yeah, delivered fuel, biofuel, and then the mixed natural gas. Yes.
Yep.
I think that's true from an equity standpoint in terms of like who could really be harmed by this. There are equity concerns with biofuels, but the impact to the customer will be less since these individual transactions are not as much. But
Yeah.
I do think generally the idea is that this is going to be a marketplace, so we might not be able to anticipate like where credits will be earned. I know that the tag is looking into this, but I think the idea being if people are going to be set loose in a marketplace, it should be our job to think about consumer issues across the marketplace and how to protect everybody in those spheres. I think creating a really strong consumer protection framework is going to be important to sort of mitigate, what we don't know yet, if that makes sense, like in terms of where these credits come from. But I agree. I mean, I think it's a good point that we should focus as much, most of our energy into these installed measures, which have the most sort of issues involved with them.
I agree with
So,
that. Yeah, should we jump right in?
sure.
Um, yeah, so there has been, comment periods on this back in December, I believe. So initially, I can just kind of throw out and remind folks what the Department of Public Service originally filed regarding credit ownership. Of course, that was kind of broad. We're focusing on equity here, but I think what we initially filed was, really kind of some core stuff that would definitely overlap with equity. And the few things that we kind of pointed out were, broadly with the credit ownership, framework, we advocated for, fairness, simplicity, and transparency. So I think from our perspective, those three tenets are broadly, good kind of touchstones for the overall structure. Certainly, simplicity I think is key. it needs to be simple to comprehend and to administer. Um, and obviously transparency is. We talked a little bit about that in our more informal group a couple weeks back. About kind of the consumer protection aspect of things. Um, basically that ownership structure should be understandable to all parties, generally, and fairness obviously is another huge issue too. We don't want to create any major financial burdens on any particular party. So yeah, so I was looking back at what we filed, and those are kind of the three things that we had pointed out at that point. So um,
I see Pike's hand up.
what's that?
Mike's
Yeah,
hands up.
along those lines, the draft that I read seemed to me to suggest that there would be fuels mixed with fossil fuels, biofuels mixed with fossil fuels, without the knowledge necessarily or consent necessarily of the end user, and that would be an eligible measure. So in terms of simplicity, transparency, etc., what I read, if I am understanding it correctly, is not at all, I would say, equitable. So I want to just say that anything needs the consent from the end user, and they have to clearly understand what they're agreeing to.
Well, see, I'm just trying to think about like this. So we came up with our working group with a sort of a bunch of conclusions. I don't think we were well poised to have everyone sign off on it. I'm wondering if there's a low-hanging fruit of like things that we can generally agree on, and that might be an indication of what the full group can agree on. I'm just trying to
Yep.
organize this in a way that we'll have results from this for tomorrow.
Right. I like that direction a lot. I think one that I think would be a low-hanging fruit is simplicity. I think whatever recommendation we come up with needs to be simple enough so that all parties can comprehend it, and that it's simple to administer. I think that's key, because the more the simplicity factor that plays into the cost of the to administering the program, and also comprehension of the credit ownership structure is really very important, so that this runs
Yeah,
smoothly. So
yeah.
so I would say that's a kind of a low hanging fruit that we make sure we chime in on.
I see Tracy from the PUC's hand up.
Hi, we can revisit this later, but I did just have a question since, we are not obviously deliverers ourselves, and we do have an expert in the room. Um, just perhaps we can revisit it toward the end of the call, but to address Pike's concern, is that something that is already happening without customer consent, that they are receiving biofuels, or perhaps there's an agreement between the deliverers and the customers allowing for a certain percentage to be delivered, without further discussion?
Yeah, I think this is for me. This is Matt Coda. Yeah, this is, remember how fuel is distributed, and it passes many hands before it gets to the consumer. And oftentimes the fuel company is unaware of the bio content of the fuel that they are receiving from upstream suppliers. We have no disclosure law in Vermont. It's not required to disclose the biofuel content of the fuel that is involved. So if a wholesaler that is an obligated party is meeting their obligation by blending sustainably sourced biofuels into their mix, the fuel dealer, the retailer that may be picking it up and then delivering it to consumers, They're not obligated, so they might not be unaware of it, and the consumer would never find out in that situation, as Pike described. Um, but there also can be a consumer who says, I want a 20% blend of renewable fuel with heating oil. That exists too. So, as to Tracy's point, all of the above.
Appreciate that perspective, Matt. Srini,
Yes,
I
thank
see your
you.
hand up as well.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the installed clean heat measures. So going back to Ben's point, I think you talked about simplicity and transparency. If I look at the staff proposal, I look at the first bullet point. The first bullet point, from my perspective, is very simple, and I think it will facilitate unbelievable transparency if the end use customer is awarded all the clean heat credits. I'm not sure what you said. The third aspect was equity. Is that what you said, Ben?
I said fairness, simplicity, and transparency were the
Yeah,
three things.
fairness. I also believe it meets the fairness criteria. So the first bullet I can 100% agree on based on those three attributes that you said.
And so that just remind the first bullet point being that the customer owns the installed measure.
Yeah, for installed clean heat measures, end use customers are awarded all clean heat credits.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's
can
a,
I tag off on that? I don't disagree with
I
what
want
Sergio said.
a chance to butt in, and then
Sorry, someone else had their hand up.
I did, Matt. It's fine if you go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that I agree with that, what Sergio said, and I agree with that part of the straw proposal. It's the bifurcating between what consumer asks for versus what with biofuels. We talk about simplicity. That's a great way to complicate the system and make it very challenging for the obligated parties, the retailers, and the consumers to figure out the credit flow. When it comes to delivered fuel products, delivered energy products, I think it should be all the same. It should all go with the entity that's making the capital investment to deliver the fuels. I agree with Pike, it should be disclosed, but the credits shouldn't be changed based on whether someone says, I want 18% versus someone that gets 18% as a result of that's the capital investment made by the fuel company because they have to make it regardless.
Matt, I think that is going to be the heart of the contentious part of this discussion. I do think Srini's focus on installed and Mia's desire to find some consensus would be a good place to, make sure we got some groundwork under us. So, Mia, do you have anything to the end of installed measures?
Yeah, I do. And I think we should separate it. I was going to say we should separate out this discussion for now, but make sure we have time to talk about delivered as well. Yeah. So for the EAG members, can we at a baseline agree that credit ownership for installed measures should belong to the customer? Is that something we're all on the same page about? I think there's nuance, but like generally,
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah, just the nuances. The customer makes a decision to make an investment in their home. They own the credit, but if you don't provide a simple pathway for that credit to move to the installer or to the entity that's incentivizing it, so it can go upstream eventually to the obligated party, the credits will, in my opinion, will be nearly worthless. Because if you're trying to aggregate credits and you have to go door to door to pick them up. It'd be like picking pennies off the street versus having a simple way to move those pennies to the obligated party through a simple but thorough and vetted stream where the person makes the investment that goes to the entity that either installed it or incentivized it, and then that can move further upstream to the obligated party.
Well, I mean, yes, I
Pike,
think when you get into trouble with, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Dominic. Pike, go on.
please.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
So I think we have to be careful about the language with investment because, for instance, in the WAP program, the person might not be making the investment in their own home because someone else is like technically paying for this. So I think I think it has to be clear and we should have an opinion as the EAG on this. So when we say investment, I think it's going to be simpler to say the person who owns the property, and that will also potentially clarify landlord issues. Like I think customer is confusing in this, and that's what we had in our original framework. I think it should be person who owns the property in which the measure is being installed into would be the framework. I think that certainly leaves open to issues that Matt raises about credit transfer, but in terms of getting us all on the same page about things we can agree on and building on that, I'd like us to be consistent about where we think ownership should at least originate and, where the credit should be start their journey, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It doesn't have to be making a capital investment, but the entity that is making the decision about that investment in their home, whether it's being paid for entirely or they're outlaying the cash. I just, yes, I agree.
To address Matt's concern, I think there will be no, and there is currently no transfer of fuel or the installation of any equipment these days without some kind of paper trail. It's a contract for service, it's a contract for fuel purchase, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see that the credit ownership transfer couldn't just be inserted into that already existing paperwork. So when someone contracts for a 20% biofuel blend, it's included in the transfer of that credit ownership is transferred at the time of sale. The biofuel dealer says, we'd love to sell you this 20 fuel blend, and in doing so, here's the contract, and the contract is going to stipulate that we're going to retain the clean heat credit. And because of that, you're going to get a slight discount on your fuel or some such.
Yeah,
Pike,
that's not
I
how fuel
appreciate.
is sold.
Well, here, I'm
yes,
going to
there
just
are,
put a pin in
yeah.
for one moment, Matt, if you don't mind. Like I said, I think we're going to have a robust discussion on biofuels blending and that delivery, but for the moment, can we keep our focus on installed measures? Ben, I noticed your hand had been up.
Yep. Yeah, I was just, I think when we were talking about, let's see, let me remember exactly what I want to say. Basically the owner of the credit being the property owner, I believe Mia said. I just wanted to point out, and the WAP program got brought up. Obviously that's 100% investment from the WAP program, so there does need to be carve outs for that. So weatherization program, putting out 100% of the investment for the installed measure. The weatherization program should be the presumptive owner in that case. I do think saying property owner gets the credit is a good way of addressing the landlord issues. Because obviously, if it's a landlord, they're the ones getting the credit because they own the property. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear that, I broadly agree with everything with the property owner, or being written as property owner gets the credit. And those who put out the investment, I think needs to also be stipulated just to include the programs that do provide 100% funding for the measure, such as weatherization program. So
A quick clarifying question for Ben, and then Mia's got her hand up. Ben, when you say stipulation for something like the WEP program, do you mean that stipulation would be in the rule surrounding this ownership framework, or would that stipulation be in some sort of other contract?
yeah, I think just basically there needs to be a stipulation carve out, I guess, however you want to put it. But yeah, I do think that there does need to be some protections in place for the a program such as the weatherization assistance program, because I think they are one of the primary sources for, if not the primary source for adoption of clean heat measures for the low income population of Vermont. So I think it's important that that program basically is able to retain the credits, and then that would therefore add value to that program to continue providing those services, be increased revenue for that program. So yeah, I do think that does need to be kind of noted very clearly.
Thank you. Mia and then Pike.
I kind of disagree in like from a technical standpoint, Ben, but not in spirit. Like, yeah, like the WAP programs are providing all the financing. It makes sense that they would generate the credits and invest them into future projects. However, I do think financing is potentially a huge can of worms that Efficiency Vermont has rebates. You would also combine those with financing like the home energy loan. I think it I think it's going to create problems too, but I think it maybe should just originate with the property owner, and then the property owner would have to transfer that credit contingent on getting WAP financing, or sorry, WAP grants, which presumably they would be willing to do that, and presumably the WAP's already having people like sign some paperwork. I just think, I mean, you could create a very like WAP specific only, but I do think if you're creating different avenues like and you're expecting that financing and incentives will be part of these projects, like I feel like it's just going to be simpler to like have the customer, or sorry, the property owner own the credits and assume that they'll immediately sign it off to the person providing the most funding for their projects. I still think I have a ton of questions about that causing problems. I just think it's the least problematic start point, even in the case of the WAP program. But it's not to say that's without problems. That's where I'd come from with that.
From a simplicity standpoint, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing Mia just said, that, even with the WAP program, I think it has to start with the owner. And in part of the WAP paper trail process that says we're going to install this much insulation and these many new windows, et cetera, in return, the owner of the property is going to hand over their credits to the WAP program, but it still has to originate with the property owner.
Yeah.
Greeny, I see your hand up.
So I think monetizing the energy credits is a different discussion than how the clean heat measure that is installed is funded through an investment, either by the homeowner or the property owner or some other third party. So what I mean by monetizing is, let's say a house owner has got a clean heat measure opportunity that is worth 20 metric tons on an annual basis of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you assign a value of $100 a ton, $2,000 is the monetized opportunity for that specific location. Now, it may take a $10,000 investment to realize the 20 metric ton per year reduction. So I just think that the true incentive is in monetizing the credit that sits with the property owner. How it gets funded, I think that's a much different discussion. So I don't think it has got to be apples to apples, and I don't feel like this group should be trying to figure that out. So
There has been some agreement around having the property owner being the initial owner of credits generated through installed clean heat measures. Is there any further discussion on that point? And if not, do you think there is language that this group could agree on to forward to the full equity before we move on to conversations about delivered measures? Mia and then Ben?
Yeah, I just know, which we discussed in our previous one, that I think language just needs to be more clear in terms of customers. I think you could get into trouble with that. So assuming we all agree, I think it should be um, credits for installed measures originate with the person who owns the property in which it is being installed, rather than a vaguer use of the word customer. If we're all on the same page about that.
Yes, I think we are. Yeah, I think what you said, I definitely agree with. I was just going to, again, say, I think it would definitely simplify it to say property owner is the primary credit holder, as you just mentioned. But with basically, as long as there's the ability for programs such as the WAP program, Weatherization Assistance Program 2, they can, as Pike mentioned, they could as long as there's the space for them to, rearrange their contract agreements to indicate, if we're going to invest X amount of money, then we be the owners of said credit. So I think as long as that there's the ability for that to occur, and as Matt pointed out, a clear pathway for that credit to flow, downstream to new owners, then I think that would broadly simplify the process to just have kind of a baseline that property owners own it, and then from there, um, individuals and entities can, facilitate the credit transfer downstream as long as the property owner is notified and is aware of how that's going to take place. So yeah, I think we can agree on that.
Srini?
For the sake of completeness, can we just also focus on the second bullet point that refers to the installed clean heat measures? I just wanted to kind of qualify what the description really means. So I think this refers to like an apartment complex that is owned by a property owner, and there are several tenants, or there may be like a condo type setup, townhouse type setup. There is like a common utility service unit that is serving 3 or 4 units within that building. So the initial credit ownership is divided among the customers by a pre-arranged agreement. Again, taking out the customers here will clarify, I think. Maybe it should directly refer to whoever is the end property owner, whether it is a part of a condo association or whoever is the owner is, ultimate owner is.
And then it could be
Does the
distributed,
group,
like if it was a condo association, they could say, okay, we have 10 units, we're going to split that to between, they could
Yeah,
work that out after the
yeah,
initial. Yeah.
not necessarily customers, but yeah, the ownership. Yeah.
Yep.
what I have written down out of this conversation is credits generated by installed measures are initially owned by the owner of the property at which the measure is installed. Is that something this group agrees on? All right, that'll be the basis for
Yes.
this part of the conversation. Um, we are at 10:41, and this seems like the juncture for moving on to conversation about delivered fuels. I'll take this time to open for around 5 minutes of public comment. Public, please go ahead and unmute yourself to contribute. If you could focus on installed measures, that would be wonderful, but we'll take all relevant comments presented concisely. I see Chris Vaughn.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to jump in here. So a little off topic from the discussion so far this morning, but on the installed measures, we wanted to participate today. There was a comment or an order from the commission in mid-December that laid out the recommendation for the administrative criteria to kind of catalog and verify the clean heat credits. And there was not a specific request for comment. So knowing that the EAG is going to be making recommendations, we thought this would be a good forum to weigh in, provide some feedback and suggestion. And our general takeaway was that the list, especially in the context of providing equitable participation, the list of criteria is quite exhaustive, and we think that there's an opportunity certainly for the collection of as much information as relevant and helpful to verify the success of this program, but that many of the measures or many of the criteria might be better suited as recommended rather than required. Particularly the need for photos of legacy equipment, as inspection notes, cost of labor. It is potentially intrusive and creates a potential for significant data and labor burden. So I just wanted to share that here. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a caller 1 on the line. You don't appear to be muted, so I want to give you the opportunity to contribute if you'd like.
Hello, I'm John McCormick. I may be caller 1, but I wanted to be certain that the EAG will have its 12 o'clock. Is that 12 to 1 meeting? Is that still on the schedule?
Yes, Mr. McCormick, thank you for calling in. We will be also having a 12 to 1 subgroup meeting on equity frameworks today. And then tomorrow we will be having the full group meeting at 12:30. Mr. McCormick, the comment you submitted is on the agenda for that meeting tomorrow.
Oh, so we will be discussing my question tomorrow, not today at noon.
Correct. I want to confirm that Mr. McCormick's question is on the agenda for tomorrow, if my memory serves.
We left potential space for it in other matters. We have a really packed agenda. Mr. McCormick, I did circulate your email and its attachment with the group. So, I'm not sure we'll definitely get to it tomorrow, but I have asked the group to look at it, and I do feel confident that it will be part of our ongoing discussions.
I think there was an earlier discussion where Jeff Wilcox said that this should probably be considered in a subgroup. Is that still under consideration?
We're currently going at our next meeting on the agenda tomorrow. We have a plan for creating a final outline, an outline of our final report that's going to be submitted to the legislature in January. And I think we're going to be creating subgroups based on that. So I think the points you raised in your email are really central to the types of things that we're discussing. So I'm not sure that's a specific subgroup, but I'm confident that it will be the types of things we're talking about. And I'm happy to continue bringing the group's attention to that email.
No, I think I beg to differ. This is essential. If the EAG cannot vote that in fact it is equitable to charge low-income families and some 26,000 LIHEAP recipients, charge them increased cost of their fuel. Now, if that's considered equitable, I believe it has to be voted upon by the EAG. And that requires a bit more discussion than we'll take it up later. I think you can't go much farther until you determine if this is going to hurt people. And if it's going to hurt people, it's not an equitable program.
Mr. McCormick, I do agree that consideration is essential to this group's charge, but for the meeting that we're having right now, we're specifically looking at the issue of credit ownership. Other items will be considered in due course, and we appreciate your involvement on this broader topic.
And I thank you for your time, but I feel like this is being sort of worded into some gray area, and Jeff Wilcox said it deserves a subgroup, and that subgroup should then be scheduled.
As we go through the process of creating the subgroups pursuant to the plan that the group is developing to address its charge, I do not doubt that there is a a topic there for subgroup consideration, but this subgroup that is meeting right now is for a different topic.
I thank you. I thank you. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Wonderful. Are there any other public comments on the issue of credit ownership specifically related to installed measures? Hearing none, we will resume group discussion. Alrighty, so looking at the staff proposal, we've discussed the first two bullets related to installed measures. The remainder of our discussion today, which I believe will be the more contentious piece, is over delivered measures. Mia, I see your hand up, so if you'd like to start it off.
I'm happy if we want to talk about delivered measures. I don't think we've fully discussed all the issues that are going to be relevant to this group in talking about installed measures. I'm happy to go with the rest of the group if we want to pivot over, but I certainly have some thoughts about installed measures that we haven't discussed yet. What does the group think about where to go time-wise on this?
Mia, how much time do we have left?
Let's see. Are we ending at 11:30? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. You know, I mean, I take Srini's point that like I think the most important thing is going to be installed measures for us to have oversight. That doesn't mean that delivered aren't important, and I'm fine to pivot to it. But I personally have some, you know, concerns about customer disclosure and customer protection with installed measures that I think it's important that we get in front of the PUC soon. If we want to pivot to talking about delivered measures, that's fine, but that still concerns me. I don't know what the rest of the AG members think.
Mia?
Go ahead, Matt.
This is Matt Coda. I agree with you. I agree with you for two reasons. One is I do care about the delivered measures, but I have a time certain I've got to be off this call at 11 o'clock. And then the other piece of it is you're right. We are installing measures today. We've been installing measures since January 1 of 2023 when they are allowed to account for credits. So for all the installers and all the obligated parties out there who are wondering whether they've got this basket full of receipts is going to be, what's it going to be worth and how it's going to work. Those questions about installed measures are fundamental. And so any more time we can to figure this piece of it out, I think is worth our time.
I agree.
It sounds like, Srini, please.
So Mia, I'm curious, what are the specific type of issues? Can you give some examples on what are the other aspects of installed measure you think this group needs to be aligned or come to a common understanding on? I have a couple of ideas, but I'm just curious what you think are the specific issues here.
Sure. I think one thing that we discussed a lot was appropriate consumer disclosure. I think the PUC in their straw proposal had some good starts about, you know, information about what the clean heat standard is and alternate programs that might be available. I think that's great. But in terms of, you know, the way I see it is the PUC is sort of anticipating, not to read words into that, but based on their proposal, it really seems like they're saying that having the customers having information will let them sort of negotiate a better deal in the marketplace and get more benefits like reduced costs or greener solutions. But I think if they don't have any idea of the value of their credits, it's not a great transactional relationship. Like if I'm having a heat pump installed in my house and I don't know, I mean, at least I think it's going to be hard to navigate, but I think that transaction should include, you know, the installer telling me, the homeowner, for example, how many credits are being generated to the best of their knowledge, and if it's possible, I think assigning some sort of dollar value to that. Now, I don't know how that works in the marketplace with credits being retired. That's going to be an evolving concept. I just think there's a lot of wishful thinking here about customers being able to negotiate in a system that they're not going to be well equipped to negotiate with. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm still seeing as an issue.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. I mean, I think the program has to figure out a way for the customers to immediately realize, even as part of their current billing today, the opportunity for, how they are contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions today, and what is the path for how they can participate in a program that will help the overall goal of the state. And there is absolutely, apart from what Efficiency Vermont does, there is not a whole lot of forums to educate the consumer. So let me just give a very specific example. I'll just take 2 minutes of time for this to illustrate a point. So when we did the climate action plan for South Burlington, we looked at the opportunity for electrification for larger and smaller homes, recognizing that over 45% of the homes in South Burlington were multi-unit families. They were not single unit. So you had to deal with the property owner or a condo association or whatever. If you look at the larger homes, in my neighborhood, there are about 50 homes. These are like large homes. As part of the climate action plan, I wrote an email, personal email to each of the homeowners, appealing to them that you're coming up on 20 years of lifetime in your home ownership. You're due for changing your chillers for the air conditioning unit. This is the right time to change the heat pump. Don't just replace the chillers. Replace them with the air sourced heat pump. Out of the 50 homeowners, I got the attention of 3 homeowners. That's it. 3 homeowners. Rest of them went their own way. So I just want to make a point. I mean, when there is an initiative close to home in a town like South Burlington, where there is a lot of visibility on what's going on, the consumers were like, I don't know, they were not tuned in. So, so I think this challenge of recognizing that the homeowners actually have the leverage here, which is very different from what Vermont has been doing for the last 15 or 20 years. I think it needs to be considered some due thought, and a lot of planning needs to go into this to educate the customer, I believe. So this is I mean, I'm talking about an affluent community, a lot of well-educated people here. If you go to rural Vermont, I think the understanding is even much lower. So
Could I just tack on to Srini's point, sort of the picture from the world of heating contractors? Remember that 3 out of every 5 homes doesn't use air, doesn't have ducting, doesn't have a furnace, has a boiler. We're a predominantly a boiler, a water hydronically heated home. So chillers aren't really even an option, replacing, even though that's a great option, and I agree with you. Um, uh, Ductless mini splits are the solution for people who want cold air but don't want a window rattler. So, I mean, that's part of it too. Not every multifamily home, even in South Burlington, which is a relatively, if you look at Vermont, a lot of new construction there built in the last 20 years. But everywhere else, outside of Chittenden County, we're using boilers, pipes, and we don't have, most people don't even have that option.
Mia?
Can we say as a group, like baseline, that we should urge the PUC to require as much information as practical in these transactions, and sort of leave it open? And then as this work goes on, we could get more prescriptive about what we think should be involved in that. Does that seem like a starting place we can agree on? It's a lot of room for, you know, ambiguity, but I'm just trying to come up with actionable suggestions for this group.
I have a follow-up question for Mia, and then we'll have Pike and then Srini. Mia, when you say require as much information as practicable, who would you imagine that information is coming from?
That's a good point. And yeah, I think the installer, or yeah, I mean, let's see. Maybe I guess the person who the credit would be transferred to. So if I'm transferring, if someone is acquiring a credit from me, a homeowner, they have to disclose this information to obtain the value of, to obtain my credits to, cash in their value later. So I think that would be the appropriate point, and I think that leaves room for the DDA to fill that role if they're engaged in that transaction. But whoever's getting the credits from the homeowner, I guess what I'd say inelegantly. Thanks.
Thank you, Mia. Pike?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Mia, yeah, I think that is necessary. And I think we've also already kind of agreed to that because I think that language is incorporated into the rubric that we are almost
Yeah.
finalized,
So,
where there should be clear consumer disclosures about these items.
yeah.
Go ahead, Srini.
So I do think that there is an opportunity for a top-down view of this whole problem. I'll illustrate one more example. I was also part of a study group of Vermont BGS, and they interviewed early adopters of heat pump, especially people in larger homes who, the specific example I talked about, where you have a four-stair heat unit furnace and you switch the chiller unit to a heat pump so that you can reduce most of your natural gas consumption. And the challenge I think Vermont Gas had was they could not individually approach the homeowners to say you are coming up on a end of the life cycle on your HVAC unit. Here is an opportunity for you to change to a heat pump. They could not do that promotion for whatever, I don't know. I didn't understand the regulations or rules at the time, but they could not go and approach the individual homeowners to say that you know this we can work with you to change this out. So I really wonder how the customers will have the awareness to say, okay, this is I have 5 years before I change my HVAC system. When is the best time to do it? Who's going to educate that customer? So I really think that there needs to be a top-down view. At least in South Burlington, we knew who were the users who were using natural gas and who were the users who were using forced air units. So I think there needs to be a top-down view at least at the Vermont level to say how you're going to guide this program so that the credits can be monetized.
So what we're talking about is basically as information is power, essentially.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
And the question is, so who would administer that? I think that's a great question, Dominic. I would think that there could be probably some language that is, and yet to be determined who puts it out. But I think as the Clean Heat Standard is developed, there could be some language, generalized language, kind of across the board language that lays out the structure of how credit ownership is envisioned, and then how that is distributed. I think could be done a lot through many different avenues. Whether it be through the low income weatherization program or through the obligated parties. But I think
Yeah.
one reoccurring theme in both of our, in our earlier equity subgroup meeting and at the meeting, the full group meeting 2 weeks ago, was that the need for a one pager or some sort of handout to homeowners, notifying them of essentially the value of what they
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
what they have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The other opportunity, I think, for the sake of completeness, a lot of towns have their own climate action plans and they have set their own targets for greenhouse gas reductions. There may be a way for the cities or the townships to play a role in engaging the residents to say, hey, this is what is coming. This is our participation. This is our opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so put the responsibility on the public leaders to spread the message and and move the initiative forward. So that's one other way of doing it.
Mia, I see your hand up.
One thing that PUC asked about in its straw proposal was the rules during the early action credit period. And I think for installed measures, when we talked about this informally, we felt strongly that there shouldn't be a separate set of rules for the sort of interim period before the rules are established in terms of, you know, for example, an installer retroactively claiming credits that they have not gotten a property owner to sign off on, or potentially have gotten property owners to sign off without knowing the value of their credits or the future landscape. And I think that is going to potentially cause some confusion and administrative challenges, but I think we felt pretty strongly that it's not right to have someone sign off their credits with in a sort of interim period with no understanding of what that credit means or the value of that credit.
We have just under a half hour left in this meeting. I'll note that Mia earlier suggested the language that the EAG would urge the PUC to require as much information as is practicable to the consumer, and we talked about it being from either the installer or the entity who is receiving the credit in the transfer. Is there agreement around that point, or is there something else that this group can come to an agreement on related to notice and information?
Maybe I would include that information should include relative costs as well as the expected greenhouse gas reductions.
Pike, when you say relative costs, could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so in areas that are serviced by Vermont Gas, heat pumps are actually going to increase people's utility costs. I think that's not the case if they're getting delivered fuel. But when we put in our heat pump, there was a disclosure from Burlington Electric saying your heating costs are going to go up. And I appreciated that, and we still went ahead with it. But I think there needs to be, from the consumer, an understanding what this is going to do to their heating cost, either beneficial or not.
Mm-hmm. Mia?
In a previous meeting, we also discussed, sort of pressuring customers to transfer their credits and what that interaction might look like. We had floated the idea, and I don't know how sort of legally viable this is. But we talked about the idea of basically not allowing installers to refuse service if the credits are not transferred. Hypothetically, the customer could transfer the credits to someone offering financing or to a third party. And so we were a little bit worried about, in our limited contractor market, people sort of feeling too much pressure to sign over their credits rather than seeking other options. I don't know about the legality of it, but we thought it was worth bringing to the PUC's attention around consumer protection and whether that was possible or not possible. Thanks.
Yeah, I would contend that the knowledge piece, the transparency would help to alleviate that concern. The more knowledge the person signing over the credits has about the value and what they're holding on to is worth, one would assume that at that point, obviously we're not going to be able to control how everybody decides to act, but I think if they are aware of the value of the credits, then they can make their own decisions how they want to. So I think it's a great point. I definitely agree with you, Mia. But yeah, I wonder if we could sort of basically the knowledge portion is where that could would come in there. So yeah, that's,
Is there any further discussion at this stage around installed measures, specifically looking at information that would need to be provided? It seems there's broad agreement that there should be information required to be provided, and that information should be fairly extensive, ranging from value of credit, relative cost of measures, a simple explanation of the clean heat standard in general. Are there any other items that we should tack onto that list, or any other concerns related to credit origination of installed measures?
I think health should be included in that. For some of the proposed heat measures, they produce particulate matter. Even advanced heat wood stoves produce particulate matter, which is a leading cause of respiratory illness and death around the world. So I think for some measures, health should be included.
Yeah. So Dominic, the only other piece of information I think Pike mentioned that could be included in your summary with everything else you suggested is the opportunity for greenhouse gas reduction at that installed site.
I've got that here, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Coming out of this discussion, are there any additional items that the subgroup anticipates the full group would agree upon, or any items that the subgroup thinks the full group should engage in further discussion about?
I think we could discuss at the full group how we think the best way for information to be disseminated to individuals would be. We could certainly, discuss how, the transparency of that, and, ensuring that I think, the equity piece of that is we need to ensure that all consumers are actually going to receive that information in a way that is digestible to them. If it is going to be a one pager that gets sent out, I think the reading level of that needs to be, sixth grade reading level or accessible. Accessibility at that point would be a concern. If it's a highly technical document that's sent out to a customer that doesn't have the ability to comprehend it, that's not going to do any good. So I think for me, it gets back to simplicity and accessibility of the information. I think we all agree that the information should be there. It's just we also need to ensure that it's accessible to all.
Heard. We have 20 minutes left in this meeting time. I would like to make sure we have at least 5 minutes to discuss deliverables and next steps coming out of this meeting, and at least 5 minutes for public comment. That leaves 10 minutes on this until 11:30. Is there anything else the group would like to use that 10 minutes on? Would we like to move up public comment to see if that sparks any more discussion? I'm curious what the group would like to do at this moment.
I think public comment could be good if anybody has any concerns that they want to throw out.
Is there agreement on that point from the group? I'm seeing positive from Mia and Srini. So we'll take this moment to open back up to public comment. Mr. McCormick, I will note that due to background noise, I did mute your call. Hitting *6 will unmute yourself and allow you to public comment. So at this time, we'll open for public comment on all things related to credit ownership. Going once. Going twice. Third time has it. If anyone had issue with their technology and would like to pop in before 11:30, please do so. Mr. McCormick, I'll remind you, *6 is the unmute command if you wish to use it. Okay, we have 18 minutes left. The majority of our conversation today revolved around installed measures, the ownership structure related to installed measures, and information to be required to the property owner relative to or related to the CHS program as a whole, the value of their credit, the GHG emissions. We also have relative costs and health disclosures as well. I've got two comments that it seems that this group agrees upon that would be directly included in any proposal that this group is suggesting to the full group. That being, credits generated by installed measures are initially owned by the owner of the property at which the measure is installed, and that the EAG urges the PUC to require as much information as practicable to consumers from either the installer or the person who the credit is transferred to. That will be the basis of the recommendation that goes up to the full group. That does not address delivered fuels, which means that it is an open question heading back to the full group. Does anyone in this subgroup have interest in writing a similar set of statements that they believe the full group may agree on and can use as a starting point for discussion of credit ownership at the full group?
So we're talking about some basic language that can be presented tomorrow's meeting.
My general thought here is the full group will need some baselines to work off of to have this discussion, and I am exploring the best way to organize that discussion at tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah, I think if we were to pose essentially your summary in written format, the way you just summarized to the full group, I think that would be, in my mind, enough to react to, because what we're saying is fairly straightforward, and I think that's by design, of course, simplicity. I don't know if others have thoughts, but I think that would be a good start for discussion.
I think we need to create the work product, Ben, so that we've produced something. And I do think having something in writing is important here, just to preserve this rather than just this meeting as a record. So I would like to get something sort of fed into the docket, or the proxy for that. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's able to do that, if not, I can work with Dominic on getting something on paper.
I can do that.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
All right, Ben, and I will send you the quotes I read off just a minute ago.
Excellent, thank you.
15 minutes left in this meeting. Is there anything else that this group feels that we can accomplish in that time?
I do think we should touch upon delivered fuels, because I think we definitely discussed that in the smaller group that we had a couple weeks back with Mia and Pike. And I feel like what came out of that meeting is pretty good, because it was, we discussed it at length. So I know we have limited time, but I think we should at least kind of touch upon it to see if our ideas have evolved on that, or we're still feeling the same way.
I think that's a worthwhile discussion point. Mia, go ahead.
Yeah, just to cap Srini up, this was something we discussed, and I think in our small informal working group, we had thought that it made sense for credit ownership to also reside with the the person purchasing the fuel. I think we did, hearing, it's too bad Matt had to leave, because I do feel like he would be a good person to sort of road test, like, what information is being shared now and what is, I think at a minimum, it would be good if people are generating delivered fuels from their customer, they should let the customer know what they're doing, in terms of disclosing the biofuel percentage. I think that seems reasonable since they're going to have to know that information in order to generate the credit. So presumably that is knowable. I think in terms of we had a lot of discussion about like what it means to initiate a transaction. I think that's something that the PUC needs to get more specific on, but that's something that I'd like to hear from Matt or someone else with expertise in this area about kind of the ways that these transactions might go and what it means to disclose or initiate and things like that. So I
Yeah,
think we made some good progress, but I don't know that I feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, PUC
yeah,
should do this.
yeah. So thanks for the background, Mia. So here is my simplistic view on delivered fuel, right? So I will start with the easiest delivered system that I think I can think of for the delivered fuel, which is natural gas that is delivered by Vermont Gas today for a lot of the consumers, at least in Chittenden County. I don't know about the southern counties of Vermont, but it's hard for me to imagine how VGS would selectively deliver any type of blended mix to any specific customer. It's really hard for me to envision. So, at a high level, it just begs the question on if the state is interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions with respect to natural gas, why not pull up the problem at a utility level and manage the credit ownership and retiring the credits and the greenhouse reduction at that top level? Why bother the consumer? It seems like we are trying to build something that'll be very, very complicated to monitor and administer. I don't know about other delivered fuels like biofuels in a liquid form, about specific parcels. I don't understand that well enough, but at least the natural gas based problem today, as we see today for greenhouse gas emissions, I think it should be managed at the state level with the utilities directly. I'm not really sure why the consumer should be bothered with it.
Yeah, of course, those would be obviously that's a utility scale, delivery pipeline system. So certainly that's is much different than liquid delivered fuel. And you do make a good point there. And that's a broader question. I don't know if we'll be able to answer in this group, um, but it is a very good observation. Um, with regards to the delivered fuel, liquid fuels. I think it's a definitely more straightforward. It's definitely more tangible. Um, to you can physically, trucks showing up and delivering it to a house. Um, so those, I think we really, I think what we can hope to accomplish here in the next 10 minutes, is I guess I wanted to pose this question: is do we broadly agree on the same principles we just discussed for installed measures for delivered fuels that essentially the transparency aspect. I think certainly just as installed measures, I think folks need to know the value of the transaction occurring. The transparency I think should extend over to delivered fuels, regardless of what ends up happening with ownership. I think just as we discussed with installed measures, I think the same principles would apply. I think can we all agree on that? That
Yes.
transparency and information is good. Yeah. Okay. Um, so I think that's kind of a baseline thing that I think we could bring to the larger group tomorrow. That's something we want to ensure transparency.
So, Srini, to address your question about natural gas, renewable natural gas, there are a couple of reasons why it just can't be imposed on natural gas consumers without their knowledge or consent. Um, First, there's just a basic ethical principle that you don't profit off of others without their knowledge. And there's some of us, myself included, that don't believe that renewable natural gas is an actual measure that's going to help our climate crisis, and I don't want to be a part of that. So I don't want renewable natural gas piped into my house, and then Vermont Gas claiming that I am part of the solution when I very much don't believe that renewable natural gas is. So I think there definitely needs to be consent and buy-in from consumers, and I don't believe that Vermont Gas or any fuel dealer can just pipe in, perhaps without anyone's knowledge, a proposed clean heat measure and then claim and receive a credit for it. Just a basic fundamental principle. It's why we get, disclosures about how our information when we sign up for Google, or personal information will be used or will not be used, and how we see on reviews that they might receive an affiliate income if we purchase through a review program, et cetera, et cetera.
Mia and then Srini.
I think my main question that I still have is whether, this whole initiates language, what it will mean in a practical sense, just for installed fuels, delivered fuels, not installed measures. Just in terms of imagining a scenario where, specifically for utility gas, we've kind of discussed that that would have to affect the system as a whole. It doesn't go directly to your home. So if a Vermont Gas customer, would have to call and say I want natural gas that has more biofuels sort of credited to my account. I just find it kind of unworkable and confusing, sort of how the initiative piece goes and what the PUC expects out of that. For sort of other types of delivered fuels like propane, or fuel oil, I guess I'm also struggling. I, as a consumer, could choose to call up the deliverer who I know has a cleaner, or higher biofuel mix than other people. But I do think that that's going to certainly create some incentives to minimize customer involvement. And I'm not going to be able to follow up as a consumer to whether the deliverer recorded me as saying I initiated it or not. So I think at a minimum, the PUC should get more specific about what they mean by initiated a transaction and try to foresee these sort of confusing interactions. I wish I had a better solution, but I'm still confused as to what it's going to look like and how to insert equity issues in there when I don't understand the framework fully.
Yeah. So my comment was just basically, I was just going to comment on what Pike shared. Pike, I do share your perspective. I wasn't going to get into the technical or the the concept itself of renewable natural gas and whether that makes sense or not. I was focusing more on, from my equity perspective, how that is managed. I agree with you that there has got to be complete disclosure and people need to be aware of what they are signing up for on everything. But at a very high level, I kind of see this as a state level problem. If they want to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions related to natural gas, there has got to be some common sense agreement on whether it, first of all, makes sense to do that in the first place. And I was focusing more on, how the end consumer decides at the end of the day whether that's valid or not. So I'm just trying to make a distinction between what the state can manage as a bigger problem versus what the end consumer can manage at an individual level. So I do appreciate your comments, though. Yeah.
I see Pike's hand up. Please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put it down.
Are there any further comments from group members on this topic specifically related to pipeline systems? If not, I'll note that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say no, I don't have any further comment.
I just want again, reiterate that I think, no measure can be a measure unless there's consent from the person who's burning that fuel.
Understood. I will note that Dylan Giambattista from VGS offered to offer comment at this time, given that they are the state's only natural gas utility, and that is primarily what we're discussing. I'll invite Dylan to unmute and give his public comment at this time.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for letting me jump in here. I know you're just about out of time, but did just want to flag two comments here on the topic of gas since it has come up. And actually, this is a more general comment about installed fuels generally with regard to providing information to consumers of these fuels about the type of fuel that might be provided, its benefits, and so forth. The credit market will be static. And of course, the performance standard in the law is something that will require a cost of compliance to be compliant with it. So really, I mean, there would be an argument I could see, I don't want to speak for the Fuel Dealers Association or others, that in fact the bill will be the most transparent source of information to a consumer on what the cost is for this added blend that they are providing to generate credits to be compliant with the program. So at the end of the day, there's going to be a cost of compliance that everyone will know. But the credit market will be constantly changing. So I think obligated parties would have a difficult time saying this transaction results in X credits that we generate. They're going to be managing complex portfolios that will probably be difficult to describe. Just a note specifically on natural gas. We agree with the straw proposal around the portfolio renewable natural gas that's biomethane that's blended into the traditional fossil gas. With regard to voluntary RNG, we've noted in workshops earlier that volume sold to customers under the voluntary tariff that we have, that all happens separately from the blend of our gas. And so customers are opting in for this energy source, but the straw proposal doesn't really acknowledge the essential role that we as the gas deliverer play in procuring, delivering, and facilitating that transaction. So that's a question that we're open to continued conversation on, and just wanted to flag that we differ a little bit from the straw proposal on that. And so if there's an opportunity to provide written comment at some point, we might indicate that. But I think right now your focus on what it means for customers receiving the product is a good place to start, and have appreciated the conversation on installed measures today as well. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dylan. I see Mia's hand, and then we will move to close up the meeting.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have time to discuss it, but I would be interested in knowing from VGS how many people are voluntarily opting into the program you mentioned, Dylan. I'm not really familiar with it, but it would be interesting to know sort of what that uptake rate is, if that's providable. Thanks.
Yeah, we can get you the latest information on that. In most cases, that program has been utilized by large institutional customers seeking to build a portfolio for their energy goals that are reflective of environmental considerations. Certainly, there are some individuals, residential homeowners, and so forth who have used it. I should flag as well, though, that under our approved alternative regulation plan, we have regulatory authority to blend increasing amounts into our portfolio generally. So while you have a voluntary program heading into a clean heat environment, it may be that it's just us blending it as a base supply at some point. So that's something we'll have to consider depending on our customers' objectives and our, I should say, Act 18's requirements that we need to be compliant with.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Alrighty, we are at 11:31. I will take this moment to ask if there is anything else from subgroup members. Hearing none, I thank everybody for their time and participation, especially the public who tuned in and offered their comments at this meeting. A recording of this meeting will be available on the Clean Heat Standard website as soon as is practical. And then, Ben, I will send you the notes that I have so that we have a written product to begin our discussion with the full group tomorrow. With that, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.